Constitutional Enforcement Pre-Study Materials, Part 3. So. Deep breath, everyone. If you are like most Americans just getting a glimpse of the beast in our bed, you are having the same sensation you get when the roller coaster drops out from under you. But be comforted. Those who sought to overcome us with lies and deceits are now on the receiving end, and they are trying to hang on to a tiger with 10 tails. I've already discussed our mutual obligation as Americans to enforce the public law, which includes the actual constitutions. There are three actual federal constitutions. In Part 1, I drew your attention to what changed in the federal government structure as a result of the Civil War and its aftermath. The American-controlled portion of the federal government that is supposed to be administered by the states of America disappeared, pending Reconstruction. It has been MIA ever since, because the people of this country weren't given full disclosure. We are just now assembling the actual states of the Union to do the work involved. The Confederation of American Federal States of States, all called Confederate States, both North and South, was formed under the Articles of Confederation, March 1, 1781, and did business under the name, States of America, from 1787 to 1861. And so we find that the genuine and original federal Constitution is appropriately named, the Constitution of the United States of America. The word "United" is used here as an adjective, not part of the name. We have plenty of copies of this document cashiered here and in England, where various British peers have preserved it too. In addition, each of the foreign subcontractors, the British monarch and the Pope, have constitutions governing their operations. The British territorial constitution is called the Constitution of the United States of America. The Papal municipal constitution is called the Constitution of the United States. As explained in Part 1, these foreign subcontractors are allowed to operate under our names because they were entrusted to exercise delegated powers on our behalf. Please note and review, the actual name of our Republican Union of States is the United States. The actual name of our land jurisdiction Federation of States is the United States of America. These are proper names and they include the definite article, the. The British territorial government operates as the United States of America. The Papal municipal government operates as the United States. We are owed and have the responsibility and duty to enforce all three of these constitutions. Our federal employees, both military and federal civil service, have the duty to obey. Please also note and remember that all federal duties take place in the foreign international jurisdictions of the sea and the air, not on our land, not on our soil. Some unscrupulous members of Congress have manipulated the Interstate Commerce Clause seeking to claim that that gives them a right to interfere with, and profit from, business transactions on the land, but in fact, the clear intention of the Interstate Commerce Clause is to promote the free flow of trade and commerce between corporations in neighboring states. Because each state is a nation, the word interstate is synonymous with international, so read Interstate Commerce Clause as International Commerce Clause and understand, 1. All enforcement of the Interstate Commerce Clause is still in the international jurisdiction of the sea, and 2. Is still limited to business between actual corporations, and 3. The only actual enforcement powers granted to the federal government in the domain of interstate commerce relate to the regulation of alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. They were granted regulatory power over the interstate manufacture, transport, and sale of these controlled substances, and the profit from these regulated activities was originally intended to support the primary cost of the federal government. This is why all IRS enforcement activities actually take place using the BATF, and why all IRS master files contain falsified information about municipal and territorial persons involved in the interstate manufacture, transport, or sale of alcohol. This is why when I obtained the IRS masterfile related to my name I discovered that I was purportedly running a rum distillery in Barbados, territorial turf and controlled substance, and my husband was purportedly selling guns and other armaments out of a base in the Virgin Islands, territorial turf and controlled substance. You can see now how misinformed federal agents were presumed upon to think that I, a grandmother from Big Lake, Alaska, a woman who had nothing to do with rum or Barbados, was actually an international criminal who owed federal taxes, fees, and tariffs from interstate sale of controlled substances. Ditto my husband, who never sold any guns. This points out the danger involved in dealing with federal agents. They aren't dealing with a full deck. Literally. They are given deliberately falsified records, so they don't know what they are doing or who they are dealing with. This circumstance accounts for incidents like Ruby Ridge, Waco, and the ambush and murder of Lavoy Finicum. These guys think they are dealing with rum producers and gun runners, and react accordingly, when in fact they are dealing with grandma and grandpa back on the farm. It's a deliberately fostered illusion of danger and federal jurisdiction, aimed at one thing, collecting money and assets from people under force, that those people don't owe, racketeering and extortion. Both. So what typically happens is that a federal agent, BATF, FEMA, IRS, NHS, DHS, FBI, CIA etc., comes in with these completely bogus assumptions, tells a few whoppers, usually without knowing they are lies, produces a few official-looking government papers that appear to refer to actual people, and local law enforcement officers fall into the same bear trap. Instead of upholding the law, you fellows get suborned and fooled into breaking it, and wind up engaging in racketeering and extortion schemes against the people you are supposed to serve and protect. I have to wonder what kind of bull crap was in Lavoy Finicum's master file. Why did otherwise sane people think it was okay to set up an ambush on a public road in America and gun down a peaceable rancher on his way to a public meeting? And exactly why shouldn't the people of this country call those men to account? There's nothing we can do now to save Lavoy and not much we can do to comfort his family, but we can wake up and take these foreign crime syndicates down, and we can clue in the agency personnel that they are being fed manufactured horse dung. For the most part, the federales aren't our enemies. Most federal employees, both military and federal civil service, and even the rank-and-file agency personnel, consider themselves loyal Americans. Most of them would throw up if they had any idea how they have been lied to and manipulated, because that, in turn, reveals the criminal acts they have participated in unawares. You can see how this works. They are given information from what they think of as an official source, so they trust their source and act upon it. And it's bourgeois. I still see the film footage of the flames at Waco and think of the little children being roasted alive in their mother's arms in the name of protecting America. Fellas, that's not protecting America. That's protecting Bill and Hillary Clinton and their sleazy pals in the CIA. It takes a strong stomach to own up to that and do something productive about it, without causing more death and mayhem. I'll admit, when I first dropped out of orbit and faced facts, I wanted to kill each and every politician in Washington. All of them. But over time, I've turned stone cold. I want all of you to fast forward and join me in that. Cold. Stone cold. Calculating. First and foremost, all the federal agents need to be clued in. Hey, Gumbo, you are being lied to and used like a nose rag? Do you realize that you are functioning as an armed corporate mercenary and racketeer acting under color of law in your own country? How criminal is that, Mr. Big Time? Until all this gets squared up, you can't trust official sources. You can't believe agency personnel and you can't trust federal records, nor can you trust any state-of-state records, because as you learned, the state-of-state organizations are all just franchises of the run-amok federal corporations. And they are not American. They are British, or they are operating under the auspices of the Holy Roman Empire. How? Why? Remember Part 1. The Brits substituted territorial states of states for our American states of states after the Civil War, and then the Pope's boys substituted their own municipal states of states after the Second World War. Look, even one incident where people are killed or jailed under false pretenses is too many. We've got something like 25 million Americans in jail, and most of them aren't guilty of any actual crime at all. Most of them are there for regulatory infractions and statutory violations that don't legitimately apply to them. They are there because, again, there is money to be made. Prisons for profit are big industry in this country. Care to guess who has the fat vendor contracts? Until very recently, it was British corporations who supplied all the prisons and who overcharged us so grossly even I couldn't believe it, and I've seen bills for solid gold toilet seats before. The British corporations are bailing out of this country and going home or romping off to China to rape and pillage there, so who holds those fat contracts now? Mostly family members of prominent politicians. Go figure. They are being set up, too. When the dog do hits the fan, there will be a bunch of pink-cheeked dumb Americans holding the bag. You will have to look back a few years to catch the actual perps. Such a deal we've got for you, Jaime. I used to look at the statistics and they made no sense at all. 96 to 98% conviction rates? Hello? How is that possible? 25 times more Americans in jail per capita than Irishmen in Irish jails? Are we actually 25 times more violent and criminal than those in the land of pub fights, embezzlement, smuggling, and the IRA? Not. It's all about money and monetary forms of corruption, and you guys are, if you take it on, going to be smack dab in the middle of the biggest criminal roundup in human history. So about now you are looking around the room and you are thinking, my God, how can we handle this? How can we even begin to address crime on a scale like this? I didn't say it was going to be easy, but recall part 1. You've got about 200 million Americans to call upon when it comes to enforcing the public law. All they really have to know is the 10 Commandments, and they can be of incredible value to you. You may also be wondering, where do we take these crooks once we arrest them, since most of the judges are on the take, and most of the attorneys can't function as lawyers, and OMG, what a mess. We couldn't possibly house them all in jails. Yep. You can't lock them all up and can't sit on them all day. Well, once again, fall back to the public law, which in this country, is the 10 Commandments. It's simple, it's direct, everyone can understand it, and it works. We still have mostly older, I admit, judges and justices and lawyers who are loyal, and the jails and the courthouses actually belong to us, not our dishonest erstwhile bankrupt foreign incorporated service providers. Most of these criminals are nonviolent, just dishonest and greedy, but before you publish their names and faces in the local paper and assign them parole officers, you have to understand jurisdiction and how enforcement relates to that. And you have to grasp the emblems and extensions of power. Let's begin with the extensions of power. There are 3 kinds of empowerment that we need to deal with: sovereign power, dependent power, and delegated power. Those of you who have studied the law of the flag know that when a flagpole standard carries a spike on the end of it, or is bare, it is called a naked standard, and it stands for sovereign power. So, carry that forward and you will understand why the actual county sheriff's badge is a 5-pointed star, 5th point straight upward, and each arm of the star ends in a sharp point. It's naked power. The Continental Marshals work directly for the United States of America, our land jurisdiction federation of states. That's a dependent power. The actual unincorporated soil jurisdiction counties are sovereign. The land jurisdiction states are sovereign. But when you go a step beyond that, and start forming things like federations of states, which are still unincorporated but dependent on the sovereignty of their members, you are dealing with dependent sovereignty. The sovereignty exercised by the United States of America depends on the sovereignty of its member states of the Union. So the badges of our federal marshals, called Continental Marshals to underline the fact that they are policing our land jurisdiction, are also 5-pointed stars with the 5th star pointing straight up, but a small ball caps each arm of the star, because they are exercising the sovereign power of our states indirectly, through the Federation of States. And then comes all the rest of it, delegated sovereignty. This is when one king works out a deal with another king to do some work for him. The first king is said to delegate power. He turns to his fellow king and says, I'd like you to do this crucial function for me, because you are better set up to do it. So the former colonists cut a deal with the British king to control our U.S. Navy and later, Marine Corps, on the high seas and navigable inland waterways, because at the time, they had a big commercial fleet and no navy of their own to speak of, to protect it. So also they cut a deal with the then Pope to provide postal service and patent service and similar intellectual property services. This is where we see all the shield badges carried by Leos and where we also encounter the 5-pointed star inside a circle. So, national sovereignty, for example, county sheriff, plain star, true sovereign power. International sovereignty, for example, continental marshals, capped star, dependent sovereign power. Territorial, municipal sovereignty, U.S. Marshals, encircled star, delegated sovereignty. So, go back to part 1. How is the American government actually organized? Just look at how the power flows downhill from the single man or woman to the county, the state, and finally to the federal states of states, right? In our actual system of government, the unincorporated soil jurisdiction county sheriff stands above all other peacekeeping and law enforcement officials and officers. His simple star is the highest emblem of all. The next highest position belongs to the Continental Marshals. The third seat belongs to the United States Marshals. And everything else, all the shield badges, bring up their rear. All the agency personnel, FBI, BATF, NHS, DHL, etc., actually have no authority with respect to our government at all. They are subcontractors of subcontractors, and sometimes these subcontracts go 4 or 5 layers deep, so whatever power they have is diluted down to the level of a private club or fraternity, acting under a commercial service contract for hire. You can now appreciate that people's assumptions about empowerment of government functionaries in this country have been turned completely upside down. How many county sheriffs think that they are low man on the totem pole? How many willingly take direction from FBI agents or BATF officials as if these guys were God? How has this happened? It has happened because foolish, gullible people, acting without granted authority and without full disclosure, created franchises of the federal corporations named after their actual counties. They did this because they were told they needed to do this in order to receive federal block grants, that is, kickbacks from the foreign federal racketeering operations. They did this because they had no idea that they were targets in a commercial mercenary war drummed up by their own federal employees. They did this because they believed in free lunch. By this legal deception, the lawful office held by the county sheriff was unlawfully converted and turned into a legal office. He became recast in the position of a low-level officer in a federal franchise corporation. His public authorities were lost, and he was suddenly just a small cog in a big wheel. And that big wheel didn't give a damn about the people or the actual law in Catcahoula County. There's a reason that sheriffs, like Sheriff Grant in Oregon, who helped the FBI murder Lavoy Finicum, do what they do. They are corporate men. They want to advance. They know the corporation will blackball them if they don't toe the line for the corporation. So they are caught between the proverbial rock and hard place, between good faith service to the people who elected them, and the demands of lawless private corporate bureaucracy. The man who took this situation on was Sheriff Richard Mack, in the epic United States Supreme Court case, Mack and Prinz v. USA, Inc. The essence of the question to be decided by the court was simply this: could an elected county sheriff working for an incorporated franchise county enforce the Constitution? The answer came back, yes, he could, acting on his own discretion. In other words, you can, if you want to get chewed up and spit out by your corporate masters, because that's not what you are getting paid for. But we can't really stop you from enforcing the constitutions. If you want to. Anyway. Sheriff Mack has continued to fight the good fight all these years, but not without a lot of pain and ear notches. He and the other constitutional sheriffs have often taken it in the shorts. I want you to know that they stood tall in the midst of a bad situation. I also want you to know that there is another way straighten out of this conundrum, and it's really quite simple. In order to function as a sheriff working for an incorporated county, you have to accept federal citizenship, because you are working for an organization that has been unlawfully converted into a federal corporation franchise. This takes our highest elected peacekeeping official and reduces him to a peon, a lowly Leo working for the man, all based on an undisclosed commercial contract entered into by a few ignorant people acting with no granted authority to do any such thing at all. So you act as the leaders you are, you inform everyone of the situation, your declare and record, land recording office, your political status as a state citizen of the United States, and you front an emergency action to dissolve the incorporated county charter and come out of Babylon the same way you got snookered in. At first glance that might seem difficult and painful, and the crooked bar attorneys will try to scare you off because at this very moment, they have their eyes set on the biggest heist of all, our counties, our soil, our national jurisdiction. In 2007, the U.S. Attorney General's office owned and operated Wells Fargo. They got some idiots in Arizona to act as an unincorporated national banking association, and got them to rubber stamp a masterline form for credit, allowing him to use our counties as chattel backing the TARP bailout. That's how they siphoned an additional $9 trillion out of this country. It was so hot, we had 3 different U.S. Attorney Generals in 3 days. That's how Obama's TARP bailout of the big banks was funded, on the backs of our counties, on our soil. They took out a totally unauthorized mortgage on our soil. And they won't be able to make their payments as of the end of this month, September 30, 2019. 3 days later, October 4th, they will be in first default. 33 days later, they will be in second default, and 45 days after that, precisely on the pagan winter solstice, these criminals plan to celebrate their final victory over America. Of course, we've been working to undermine that outcome with hammer and tongs, but what I am pointing out to all of you, is that holding the bag for a bankrupt and corrupt foreign corporation is not a tenable position for you, or for your counties to be in. You are all going to lose your jobs and your homes and everything else, right along with all the other victims of this scam, if you don't jam the rudder into full reverse. So, that's one way to do it: tell everyone on the county board what's up, and get them to vote to dissolve the incorporated county. It's a beast made of paper. Fold it up. And what if they won't? Well, just step aside, give them back their badge and squad car, walk across the street with a few like-minded men, and pin on your actual badge and serve your actual county. Put out the call for a few hundred deputies. Just like the United States Supreme Court said, you can enforce the public law, the law of the land, at your discretion. Capital-level identity theft, bank, probate, and securities fraud are all against the public law. There's only one, true, unencumbered elected peacekeeping official, and that's the actual county sheriff, and right behind him, stand the Continental Marshals. For all of you who are just getting up to speed, actual county sheriffs are elected peacekeeping officials, their unelected deputies are peacekeeping officers. Continental Marshals are also peacekeeping officers working in international jurisdiction. And when you guys are standing on the land and soil and dealing with public law enforcement, nobody, including the FBI, can say jack squat to you. Leos occupy a whole different and lesser position in the hierarchy of the law and technically aren't part of the actual government structure. Leos are, technically, guns for hire, private security personnel, corporate mercenaries, Pinkertons. Many Leos have been misdirected and misinformed by their corporate bosses, deliberately given false information so that they make false assumptions and carry through criminal actions. So we have to educate Leos and separate wheat from chaff. To add insult to injury, most Leos aren't even insured and can be sued in their personal capacities. Like our soldiers who have been abused and used as cheap mercenaries, Leos can't count on any county corporation at the best of times, and these are far from the best of times. Your unincorporated county is the power in this country. Please be aware that just as the sheriff's star is the simplest and the most powerful, your actual county goes by the simplest proper name. It's Cleveland County, not County of Cleveland, not Cleveland County, not any variation at all. Just plain old Cleveland County, Ohio. Remember the sheriff in To Kill a Mockingbird? I might not be much, Mr. Finch, but I am still sheriff of Macon County. And Hank, the sheriff, proceeded to tell Atticus Finch, the lawyer, what was going down. That's the way the power flows in America, not the other way around. Remember the old John Wayne movies where he would deputize half the town to go after the bad guys? That is an example of an actual county sheriff taking care of business. You have unlimited resources and lawful capacity the moment you chuck the corporate charter, declare and record your proper political status as a state citizen of the United States, and pin on your sheriff's star. Remember that everything these corporate jackals have done, including taking out a mortgage on our soil, was done via fraud, and there is no statute of limitations on the crime of fraud. Also remember that fraud taints everything it touches. In terms of public law, that pretty much blows us back to 1860, when Lincoln was elected under false pretenses, a circumstance that invalidates his whole administration. And everything that came after. Remember that this current crisis was engineered by the Office of the U.S. Attorney General, and that bar attorneys and corrupt judges, ignorant politicians, crooked bankers, insubordinate generals and deliberately misinformed federal employees are the core cause of this problem. So start educating everyone in your county, because it is your county. That's part 3, and in a way, the fast forward of the situation report. You can, thanks to Mac and Prinz, use your discretion without apprehension. It's time that you do. As you gear up, remember that the United States of America, unincorporated, is still here, and has the weather gauge on these pirates. They aren't going to get away with stealing our country, and nobody in their right mind is going to come to their aid.